So, what I'm going to cover today is, generally speaking, how to study for the LSAT when you've got about 3 weeks left. Because if you're taking it on January, then that's January 26th. So I think from today there's actually probably exactly 20 days left. Because it's the 6th. And if you're taking it later than January, this will still be useful, and you can also keep it in mind when you're studying later. So, and you'll be able to ask questions. I think there's a manageable enough number that if you just ask questions as you go, I can answer them. But I'll first be doing stuff like on specific topics, and then we'll have like a open-ended Q&A afterwards. So, I think the most important thing to do 3 weeks out from the LSAT is just to kind of take stock of where you're at. Because while you can still make progress, you can't make like all the progress. In other words, you have to pick a specific goal and work towards that. You know, if you want to get a 165 and you're scoring at 140, then you just don't take January and take it later, because you're not going to be able to progress enough in that time. But assuming you're within like 5 points of your goal, then you can do that, and you have to focus specifically though. I just want to mention something in passing also, just in terms of like how to set expectations. Generally speaking, I think the way progress goes is people improve about 10 points from their diagnostic. That's like a timed test that you take before doing anything else. If you do a bunch of studying before taking the diagnostic, then you would normally see less of an improvement because you already made some improvement before you measured it. However, when I say about 10 points, what usually happens is you'll make a bunch of progress at the start, and then you'll keep going up. As long as you're still going up, then just keep doing what you're doing. You can still expect further improvement. So if you've improved 9 points, but you've been seeing steady improvement, don't think that the 10-point thing means you're not going to improve more. It's just a lot of people tend to stall around that point. But 3 weeks out, this is helpful for assessing your progress, because if you've already made 10 points of improvement and you've been studying for 3 months and you haven't improved at all in the last month, then realistically, you're probably not going to make a sizable improvement in the remaining 3 weeks. You might be able to take a break and make a sizable improvement with a longer period, or if you just need a small improvement, you might be able to do that, but no giant leap. So this is important to keep in mind. But assuming you're roughly at your goals, the second thing to do is just to look at what you're scoring on each section, and think about both the difficulty of improving on that section. Generally speaking, logic games is easier to improve at. Reading comp is the hardest to improve at. Logical reasoning's in the middle. And then also think about how far you have improved on that section. So, if you started at, 5 on logic games and you got up to 20, then that's incredible progress. But if you've then been stalled for a while, it might mean that those remaining 3 points are going to be harder for you to get, even though usually 3 points on logic games would be easier than someone else. You've already gotten all the low-hanging fruit. So you should see where you're at. And in logical reasoning, the low-hanging fruit is the stuff based around conditional logic. This is, like sufficient conditions. If you're a cat, then you have a tail, sufficient and necessary, that sort of thing. The reason that both logic games and sufficient and necessary on logical reasoning are easier to learn is because they're very repeatable. Once you learn what sufficient and necessary conditions are, they don't really change. The words used in specific phrases may be different, but the underlying principles of sufficient and necessary can be explained in about 10-15 minutes. The rest is just seeing examples and practicing them and getting an intuition for it. The people that start really, really high in the LSAT sort of already know intuitively how sufficient and necessary work. Sorry, I just had a sore throat. I'm going to have a little throat mint while I talk. But so sorry if this gets in the way a bit. But okay, someone asks, what would you do if you got on the last exam a 141, but you've improved after on practice tests? Can you score a higher score if you take it in January? And probably. The practice test scores are the best indicator. So I'm assuming this question means you got like a 141 in September on the official test, and now you're scoring at like a 156 or something on practice tests. If you've been timing your practice tests right, then I would expect you to score around 156 if that's what your practice test showed. I'm going to talk more about that later, actually. So the highest potential things are logic games and the conditional reasoning parts of logical reasoning. And I would say the following question types: parallel reasoning, necessary assumption, must be true, sufficient assumption, and some of the principal questions. Drilling nose can be productive. Flaw questions, sometimes they have to have a fair bit of self-awareness about it, because the biggest problem on flawed reasoning questions is a lot of students just don't know what the answers mean, even the wrong answers. So it takes you forever to read through it, and you try and like twist a wrong answer to make it right. But if you knew what it meant, it would be obvious that it wasn't right. So repeating flaw questions, thinking of like, what does this answer actually mean, even the wrong ones, that can help you improve on flaw questions. Anyway, I would take stock, and then I would drill that specific thing quite intensely, and then assess as you go. And I think it's also helpful to keep a bank of questions from like questions that you've done that have been very difficult for you, whether or not you got them right. Because even like a question you got right, if you didn't fully understand it, you want to go back and redo that. And then redo those questions, and you're trying to build an intuition for the patterns. So that's one thing. But another big thing, I mentioned timing, and this is very important. You may have heard that some people drop on test day. And a reason this happens in a lot of cases is students are just sort of, it's easy to be over generous when timing yourself. You know, you do one section, then maybe you go use the washroom, or you take a break for 30 seconds, and like, how much can this really matter? Or you don't use an answer sheet, you know, you just circle the answers, you know, bubble them in. But the answer is these matter quite a bit. Like LSAT test day is very stressful. It's long. It's 5 hours. And if you've just been kind of doing like separate sections and joining them together, or taking extra breaks, or not using the bubble sheet, because that takes about 2 minutes to fill in per section, then you've been giving yourself extra breaks and extra time, and that is going to take out of your score. Likewise, if you've only been training in like an extremely quiet room with like no distractions and nothing, you can kind of be shocked by the test day environment. I think it's good to do at least like one test in a cafe or something where there's people around and you're just in a different spot, because I can assure you the test day room is going to be different, and there's going to be people moving, visual distractions, and you need to be prepared for that. So what I recommend, I should know this, but does anyone know what time the test is on January 26th? 8:30. Okay, so that means you want to take at least some practice tests at 8:30 and plan out backwards what time you're going to have to get up, which means you have to plan out backwards what time you should fall asleep. Because if you just try to do it on test day, what will happen is you might end up having a stressful morning, a poor night of sleep, and it's like stupid how much this affects our performance. The LSAT is not a memorization test like you had in university where you could pull an all-nighter, cram a bunch of stuff, and just regurgitate the answers. It's a skill-based test. So not sleeping before the LSAT is like someone not sleeping before the Olympics. And I don't think that many record winners had, actually, be interested to know how they sleep, but I'm guessing they tend to sleep pretty well if they're better performing. There's like all kinds of studies showing the negative mental effects of low sleep, and you'll just be like much worse at LSAT stuff if you don't. So you probably want to be up at like 6:30, which means bedtime is 10:30, which means you want to start like getting ready for bed, dimming the lights, not using phone by about like 9:30 probably. And ideally, in these remaining 3 weeks, like that'll be the new sleep schedule that you do. You just become like a early bird, so your body's used to getting tired around the time, so it's like no trouble on test day. Yep, your mom is right. You need to get to sleep. Like I can't tell you how many stories I've heard of like silly test day stuff screwing up months of practice, which is why I'm emphasizing it so heavily, because while it's important to practice right, one of the biggest things you can do is not mix up test day. Another thing is to read the rules on the LSAT website for what you're allowed and not allowed to bring, and not allowed to do. For example, you can't have a cell phone with you. So if you're planning to Uber to the test day center, then you need to either have someone call an Uber for you afterwards, or maybe get the number of a local taxi company and bring some cash or something and do that. But you can't have your cell phone, which is like kind of crazy in 2019, but that's part of the rules. And there's very specific rules about what you can have with you on test day. So when you take the practice test, so I think you should start taking practice tests or sections as well. Even if you're not doing a practice test on a given day, you could just do a practice section at 8:30, so at least you're getting the timing right. I think you should do them with the same Ziploc bag that you bring to the LSAT test center, because in the Ziploc bag you're allowed to have like a few pencils, an eraser without a sleeve, oddly enough. If it's a little vinyl one, you can take the sleeve off. Like one snack, well actually, they're not super clear on a snack, but some kind of snack, one drink container, so you have to choose between like coffee and juice and water. And so on. Like read that list on their site. Make sure you've got it right. Also, just double check that your ID matches your test center admission thing, that they haven't like misspelled your name or added a wrong middle initial or something like that. This is like good preparation for law practice, where you have to like check all kinds of little things. Yeah, that's why I do it. But check that that's right. But start practicing that way so that you're very used to it. Someone asked when do we get the LSAT tickets. I'm actually not sure. I haven't taken the LSAT in a while. I'm guessing though they must have something on the online dashboard where you can see the information that they have. Someone says January 11th you should be able to print them, so you'll have 15 days. What else was there? Okay, I also want to talk a bit about the mental side of things, because this is the other thing that I find screws people up on test day, and also in these last 3 weeks. So first of all, whilst continuing to study is important and you can make progress, if you've been studying for 3 months, realistically it's like the sum total of all the studying is going to make the difference. It's not what you do in the last bit. A lot of people in the last week especially start to like cram, and when I look at the traffic on my site and like the week before the LSAT, it's just like choom, and I'm like, I don't know what people are doing. Like, why weren't you here before? But it's actually not that important. Like the very final week, the most important thing in the very final week is like relaxing, reinforcing habits, and the day before the test, just like not doing anything. Even maybe 2 days before the test, not doing anything, relaxing, and being rested, and so on. And it's important not to like psych yourself out mentally, because as the test day gets closer, you start to attach more and more importance to this thing. Like when you registered for the LSAT a few months ago, you're like, oh, I'll study for this thing and I'll do pretty well. And now you've just been doing LSAT for months and months, and it feels more important. And while it is important, this particular test day can feel more important than it is. And what I mean is, first, schools just look at your highest score. So I know January is a little late in the cycle, but if you've already applied and you take it again in March and you get, a 172, whereas you got a 163 before, it doesn't matter that that's late. The schools want the high scores, and that like a high score absolutely trumps an earlier application. That's just how it is. So you can always retake. And you may think, well, it's kind of late in the year. I don't know if I have time to retake this year. Like, I've got to do it now or else what? asking like, or else what's the worst case scenario, is how you can talk your brain down from the ledge of thinking that January 26th is the be all end all of your life. Because what happens if you don't get a good score on January 26th? Well, you could take a year off and apply again next year. And I mean, granted, there are like occasionally some life circumstances where someone's, I don't know, 36, have a family, have already quit their job. Okay, someone asked, isn't the January 26th that's the last one eligible for the cycle? I could be wrong, but I believe that, like, I think you have to apply, but I think scholarship negotiations still happen afterwards, and like people are on the wait list afterwards. So I'm pretty sure if like you've already applied and you're on the wait list or something and you get a higher score, then you can submit that score. Okay, if you're talking about Canada, it's a different story. I'm actually from Canada. I'm assuming most of you are Americans. I could be wrong on this. In Canada, the law school application cycles are earlier, and also the LSAT is less important, and it does matter more in Canada. So, you know, if you don't get the good score now, you probably have to take a year off in Canada. In the States, I could be wrong, but like I think if you get a higher score later in the cycle, your application's already in, they're still going to look at it, and if it's good, then they can bump you up off the wait list. Regardless, if you have to take a year off, like it is not the end of the world. There are plenty of things you can do in a year off. If you are just out of school, it's a chance to like get work experience for a year, travel the world. You could work like at a law firm as a intern or paralegal. Okay, PowerStore's got a chart here. Let me just look at this. Okay, these are the application deadlines. What I think, though, like, I'm assuming that a lot of people listening to this have already applied, and at a school, if you're on a wait list, will look at the later thing. I'm not actually an admissions expert, and this isn't the hill that I want to die on like which LSAT in a year is accepted, because my main point is actually that you can also take a year off and do something, because the thing is, if you get a higher LSAT score and you get a scholarship at the same school, that can be worth like $200,000. And that is like far more than you'll make in a year, even as a lawyer. Well, I mean, if you're at big law, you could make 160, but that'll be taxable. And it'll take you a while before you earn like 210 after-tax dollars. So it's definitely worth waiting if you plausibly can get a higher score. And so, and even if, you know, let's say you're never able to get a good LSAT score, what's going to happen? Are you going to like live in a ditch and be a hobo? No. If you're in a position where like you could be at a good law school, you probably also have other decent life options. Not necessarily like the main thing you want to do, but you're not like, basically you want to be precise about what the worst case scenario is, so your brain doesn't just fill it in with like a vague nothing, which is the most anxiety inducing. Because what happens on test day, when people get test day panic, is they're imagining like that the LSAT is like a life or death thing, because it's just a piece of paper. Later in the year, it'll eventually be a thing on a computer screen, but it's the same thing. It's not a bear. But because we attach importance to it, it triggers our fight or flight response, and so it can put you in fight or flight mode. But you can't fight logic problems. The only way to do them is to be calm and to think about them. So that's why telling yourself that, like, well, this is important and you would like to do well, it's not the make or break thing of your life. There's other times to take the LSAT, there's other years to take the LSAT, there's other things to do in life, and though you want to do this, don't put so much pressure on that it feels like life or death. At a more like tactical level, if you feel yourself getting stressed, also know that like there's always time to stop, take a few deep breaths, look around the room, focus in the present moment, and return. Because 10 seconds of breathing is always faster than 1 minute of panic. Always. And catching panic early and keeping it small is what lets you just see a hard thing and recover and do fine on the section. Like, even I look at the LSAT and I'm like, ooh, this question looks hard, you know. But I just pause, I breathe, and then I get back to it. So managing yourself is an important thing to work on in the final 3 weeks. Okay, someone asks, do you know if multiple test taking affects admission consideration? No. At the moment, schools only take the highest. The LSAC now allows you to take more than 3 LSATs in a 2-year period. So at some point in the future, schools may start considering multiple LSAT takes. There's also more LSATs in the year, so you may start seeing people with like 12 LSATs or something. And you know, at that point, then maybe at some point schools will change their policies. But at present, no. Multiple takes are fine. And if you're like 3 or 4, that's like totally normal. So it's not excessive. Does anyone have any like test content specific questions, by the way? Here's one about RC. Okay, so you check the answers and you find that the other answer is obvious instead of your choice. How do you solve that? So I guess the first question is, were you down between your choice and another answer, or did you like miss the right answer, but then after the fact it seemed obvious? Because those are 2 different scenarios, so I'd like to know that before I answer. Yeah, I guess the first thing I would say is track all of the questions that you get where you're down to 2. So just while you're doing the section, if you're down to 2 or 3 on a question, give it a star. And then find out how often you're actually choosing the right versus the wrong answer. Because a lot of people just check the ones they get wrong. But really, yeah, it's actually 50-50. You're down to 2 and you choose the right one half the time, the wrong one half the time. So you need to see if like you're actually getting it right or wrong. If you're actually just choosing the wrong one, or if it's actually between 2. And if it is actually between 2, then, you know, for your conundrum, of course it's going to be obvious. Once you find out that, like, of 2 questions, you're like, it's got to be one of these 2, and you find out one's wrong, then of course the other one's going to seem obvious. Because now that you know it's right and the other's wrong, you're going to more easily potentially see why it's right. You may also fool yourself and, like, have the wrong reasoning for it. That can happen too. But what I would focus on is disproving answers. So not trying to rush and say something is right, but instead thinking like, what's wrong about this? Is there something in the passage that would make this wrong? Is there some detail difference that I'm missing? And trying to eliminate rather than to choose. How long have I been going, by the way? Okay, I'll answer a few more questions, then I have an announcement, then I'll keep answering questions. Okay, someone says, what's your take at reapplying to a school you've been previously rejected from, but now have a slightly higher LSAT score? The most important thing you should look at for a school is what's their median LSAT score, because that's what determines their rankings in the US News and World Report, and that's what the schools care about. So, you know, if a school's median is 163, and then you had a 156, and now you get a 158, that doesn't really matter. You're still below their median, you're still dragging their median down, they don't care. But if it's 163, you had a 162, now you're 164, you're dragging the median up, and I think you would see favorable results upon reapplying. So you have to check the median stats and check them for an updated year. Slight exception for those of you who are in the underrepresented minority category. They don't have like exact numbers on these, but generally you get a boost in applications, so I don't know what like if it was 163, I don't know what score you need as a URM, but it would be something below that, and so a slight boost might put you over whatever URM score threshold there was. So if that applies to you, then maybe check with the school specifically and just ask them, like, is this good enough that it's worth reapplying? Schools are pretty honest, I think. Let's see. Someone asked about flaw and strengthen. Like, you just want to hear about those, or did you have like a specific question? I'm just going to answer a couple other ones first. Your recommendations for finding resources for drilling. Let me just find something for you, actually. On my site, this is for logical reasoning only, but I've got a list of logical reasoning questions organized by type. You can use that to get the question types for these exams. So you can just find like flaw parallel questions and so on. Another thing you can do, I generally recommend this for rule substitution. Oops, shouldn't be. It does need big capitals. You can do this. You can search within any site by just typing site : the website name into Google, and then type rule substitution. And what the? That didn't work. There we go. Get rid of the HTTPS and just use lsathacks.com. And this just searches Google's index within LSAT Hacks. And here you can find like all the rule substitution questions, and you can just assemble a drill set out of those that way. And if you just Google online like list of hardest, necessary assumption questions, you'll also find articles and stuff on that. I think Cambridge LSAT has a book on Amazon that has like a very comprehensive set of questions by type that's also very good. One moment, I just want to see how many people are still here. 41. Okay, before I answer more of the questions, I just wanted to have like a quick announcement. Probably also already saw this from the email if you came here from email, but actually, one sec. You probably already saw this from the email, but I'm having a January New Year's sale, and it is 35% off. So I'll just send the code for that. It's LSAT Hacks 35. So I sometimes do these sales in advance of the LSAT, about like 3 weeks out. And the purpose of this, like I said, you're not going to improve like everything in 3 weeks, but you can still improve something. And if you get like a 3-point increase at this point, say you've already improved 10 points and you get 3 more points, and that pushes you over some school's median, like that's a very, very good result. So that's sort of the goal that I have in having a sale at this point, is like, all right, you didn't use a course before, but now at a cheaper price, you have a chance to use like one of these 3 mastery seminars, say, and improve in a specific area and potentially boost your score. I tend to recommend the mastery seminars at this point because they're aimed to be used quickly and they're short. The logic games and the RC mastery seminar are 5 hours long, and the logical reasoning is 13 hours long. And the logical reasoning is also organized by question type, so if you just want to focus on flaw questions or strengthen or parallel reasoning, you can find the section just working on that. Because some people instead of just watching like one of the videos in, say, the LG Mastery Seminar has helped them score better. So it's not something like people often ask like, oh, do I have time to like, watch every single minute? Well, I mean, actually you do. On a 5-hour course, you do have time to watch everything. But the point is, even like a single valuable insight could be enough to make a difference in like nudging you over and getting a bit of a higher score. And that really matters, because if you're over a median, then that's when they give you scholarships. So I'll just tell you a bit about these before we go back to Q&A. So what I did with these was I selected some representative questions for each question type from LSATs 62 to 66, and I sat down and I took them myself timed. And while I was doing each question, I had a stopwatch running. I was looking at it, and I sort of made notes on like what I was doing, like how many seconds it took me to get to the question stem, how much time I spent on the answers, and what were like the key points that like I actually did. Because when you look at like an LSAT book, they're like 700 pages long or something, and they're like just explaining everything, and every concept in those books is like true and helpful if you were to know it. But that's not what like experts actually do. Like they don't just sit and like think paragraphs and paragraphs is how they approach the question. It's all done intuitively because they just sort of know the important things to focus on. So I was trying to identify like what am I doing moment by moment is like how do I actually solve these as opposed to how do I think I solve these to get at the actual method rather than what happens when I sit down and just write my thoughts about the LSAT because those are two different things. And I then filmed videos showing what I did shortly after doing the questions timed, so that it was all fresh in my mind, and I like highlighted those things that I looked at. That's the mastery seminars. And sorry, that's the mastery seminars, and they're aimed at people that are scoring, I would say, 160 or above, or if you've already taken like another course and you're scoring above 165, 155, you probably still get value. Like, usually, like, basically, they assume you already have LSAT knowledge and know the basics, and they're not going to go over them. Like, I'm not going to explain what a sufficient and necessary condition is. I'll assume you know it. I'll instead talk about, like, the more advanced techniques in these seminars. So, a really good purchase can be just getting, like, the LG or DRC Mastery Seminar and using that before testing. There's also, like, the set of all of them. That's at a reduced bundle price. It's $549 instead of, I think it'd be about $700 if you bought all three separately. And with this discount, I believe it comes out to about $349. So it's a pretty sizable discount. And you get like a year of access with these two. So if you're studying for later, or if you might retake after January, you can still buy this now and use it later. And also, there's no payment to extend access. If you need to use it like in 2020 as well for some reason, you can just ask and I'll extend it. The only reason I have the 12-month limit is that I don't have a bunch of like zombie accounts that took the LSAT 5 years ago and are done with it. And they all come with a 1-week satisfaction guarantee. So that's definitely enough time to like check the thing out, see if it's helpful to you. If you don't find it helpful for whatever reason, not a big deal. Just email me and I'll give you your money back. There's always a few people for whom like videos aren't like the best thing or whatever. So it's no skin off my back. But most people that take it really like it. You can check out the reviews on any of these ones. Just go to like this tab here and you can see what people said about them. And I think you will really enjoy these courses and find them very easy to apply in the time that's left. They're only 5 hours long, or if you're doing the LR Mastery, you can watch like 2 or 3 of your hardest question types in like 2 hours, and I think it can help you. So, does anyone have any questions about those? Once again, the discount code is LSAT Hacks 35, and that's valid until tomorrow at midnight, Monday. Yeah. There's a discount code for anything, like anything on the site, including like I also have a course here for people that are just starting out, and you can use it on that too. That's a bit longer though; it's like 24 hours plus some other lessons. And I'm assuming at this point, if you've already been studying, you already have encountered the basic concept somewhere. So probably the master seminars are a better fit. But yeah, you can use this code LSAT Hacks 35 on the bundle. I'll show you what you do. Actually, you just go in here, you click add to cart, go to checkout, and you go to apply coupon, and well, that's weird. Does not exist. Bear with me one moment, because this was working like this morning people were using it. Always good to test these things. Unless I had a typo in there. No? Oh, yeah, it's actually like, this should work. I don't know what happened there, but I think it might have been my ad blocker. Is anyone listening to this able to confirm that the code works? Yeah, it works. Okay. So clearly, I just have I have all kinds of ad blockers running on my system, and I must have broke something. Yeah, someone asks, is it in USD? Yes, because like 90% of the people on the site are Americans or abroad, so I just price everything in US dollars. If you're Canadian, there will probably be sales tax on it as well, depending on your province and your billing address. If you're American, there's no sales tax. It's just like a legal thing. I have to charge it to Canadians because I'm Canadian. Okay, someone asks, if we were to choose one master seminar, do you recommend getting the section for where we're scoring the lowest, or a section where we're scoring higher but could still increase our score by a couple points? I would recommend the latter. Just because, like I talked about, identifying like the high priority areas are probably logic games or a couple of specific question types on LR. I guess like the exception might be if you just had never studied for RC, had never really used any good methods, and you just felt bamboozled, then maybe doing that could just like show you like, oh, this is what I should do, and it might make for a larger increase. That's possible. Can also say that like I don't mind if you like buy something and watch it for a little bit and then decide, you know what, I bought this today, but I would rather get the other seminar. Like it's fine to switch. Because I'm assuming most people that like use them and like them are going to want to watch stuff multiple times. So, sorry. So I trust you to be honest about like you tried it and you'd prefer like logic games instead of reading comp. So I don't mind switching you over. So you can get either one. My inclination is the one that's easier to improve. But if you're just like totally lost on a section, have never tried anything, then maybe the one that's your lowest section might actually work better, just because encountering good methods might like make for like a light bulb moment and let you actually get traction on it where you didn't before. Any other questions about the seminars? Oh, and thanks. Someone said they use the LG one and highly recommend it. For the person who said that, do you have anything you can say about it, like what it helped you do or what you liked about it? Or if your score improved? We'll get back to Q&A in a minute. I just want to see if anyone has any questions about that. So LSAT Hacks 35 is the code. And the LR Mastery Seminar, someone asked how long it is. It's total 13 hours. And it's arranged into sections. Actually, I'll show you the sections. By the way, when you buy it, if you ever see this page, member login, you can get the course list here. It's just, you got to use these membership plugins on WordPress, and it's technically complicated, but there was like no better way to set it up. So here's the LR Mastery Seminar, and you can see they're arranged by question type here. So if you wanted to do parallel questions, you could just jump straight to this lesson. Like, there's no real need to watch the intro if you just want to focus on a specific thing. This is the list of questions used, and then I'll just let this play for a minute. I don't know if this will show up in the recording, but you can see I'm just making notes about the question, and you can pretty easily jump around as well and see like what the question is from the heading. So this video is about a bit under an hour long, and it covers these 8 questions, plus at the start there's a description of like how to do them in general. Oh, am I not sharing my screen? I'm sorry. I thought I had a screen sharing up this whole webinar. My mistake. I had meant to have a screen share going. I'll just go back and do that again. So you can see it starts with like an intro, parallel reasoning, then there are headings that show the question under discussion. So you can kind of jump around and see. There's a question list underneath the video that shows like what's discussed in the order. And then I just sort of have notes on the things I was doing in each question. And there's an overview here that shows like the syllabus of what's covered when. So even though this is the longest of the seminars, I still think it's pretty easy to do it quickly because you can just find your question types and jump straight to those. Oh, thanks. Logical reasoning mastery is really good. Same with the other person. Would you mind like saying what you got out of it, what you liked, if your score changed, and so on? So Misha, who did logic games mastery, says, I'm still not fast enough, but I've mostly get rid of the errors. The seminar gives a lot of good general points, and also it's relentless in its focus on the efficiency. I like that because that's really what I was aiming for when I was doing them. I think there's a lot of wasted time on questions, and like even when you're doing easy questions, like if you do a question in a minute 25 and you could have done it in a minute, that's 25 seconds you could have done on a harder question. And I really want to show tips that show you how to eke out that efficiency gain even on stuff that you think you're doing right, because you could always go faster. And I find one of the biggest things that helps me get high scores is that I have this buffer of time, so that some questions just I take like 5 minutes on. It's not common, but I have the luxury to be able to do that because I'm really fast everywhere else. So Mitchell, who took LR, said, Graham's approach is not about tricks and games. He teaches you to understand. And Rachel says, if you use the LR, Graham gives a mini lesson, dives right into dismantling a test question step by step while offering pretty good tips, easily missed errors. Misha also said about LG, finally and very importantly, it does a great job of showing, I'm guessing that's showing how to arrive at good deductions. Someone asked, did the seminars have dates or is it already recorded? I think I may have chosen poor names because something about the word seminar seems to imply that it's live. But they're actually recorded things. They actually originally were a live class, but I recorded the class. I find teaching to a live audience helps me teach my best for some reason. I don't know why. So I originally did them live and recorded that, and then edited them, and they are just recorded videos. And then someone adds that the LR seminar helped them with sufficient assumption, necessary assumption, and they found that those were their weaknesses by using a 7 stages score tracker thingy. Wow. Mitchell says, LR seminar moved me from 165 to 170 to 173. That's great. Because if that just came from one section, that's like a huge difference. Biggest difference is that I feel less stressed during the section because I'm focusing on comprehending on what the stimulus is saying instead of reading the SEM and trying to game the question. Yeah, that's exactly what I want to instill. But like, I think the biggest thing about the LSAT is just understanding what's being read. If you fully understand an LR question and what the answers mean, then it'll be obvious. The entire difficulty is in understanding what the words are saying. And they make it seem like, there's tricks and traps and methods and so on, but really it's really, really, really advanced reading comprehension. And that's what I try and get across in the seminars. Geez, I should ask people to like talk about taking them in other webinars. This is actually the first time I've done this. I don't know why it never occurred to me to get like live reviews from the chat. Someone says, do you recommend to read the stimulus first and LR? I actually don't think it matters. I personally generally read the stimulus first. But sometimes I'll read the SEM first. Like I'm not even consistent. I don't think it makes a big difference. And there are high scorers who do one or the other, and everyone seems like really like strident about this, but I think if people are doing it differently, then it can't really be that important. I find generally I prefer to read the stimulus first so I can focus on understanding it. But if I get kind of like puzzled or stalled on the stimulus, I'll switch to the stem to give my brain like a little break, let it like idle for a few seconds, and then go back to the stimulus. Okay, Anyone else have any questions or comments on the seminars before I go back to Q&A? And thank you for all the testimonial reviews, guys. That was great. If you have taken it and want to leave some of that as a testimonial, if you go to the Master Seminar pages and say go to LG Master Seminar and click the review tab, if you leave a comment here at the bottom of the page, you can put a star ranking and write the review and so on. So it'd be great if you did that. All right, that seems to be everyone's questions, so I'm going to go back up and go back to the Q&A. But if anyone has more thoughts or questions about the seminars as we go, feel free to add those. Oh, right, I should say LSAT Hacks 35 is code, valid till end of day tomorrow, and that's a link to the Mastery Seminars. Okay, so I'm going to ask about flaw and strengthen questions. For flaw, my biggest tip is redo the questions and try and figure out what the wrong answers mean. Try and figure out an example of the answer. What would actually be an example of this flaw? And if you look at my explanations for the latest exams, I tend to actually include that in the explanation, so that can be a good source. You have to figure out, what does this mean? What would be an example that fits? Because on a flaw question, if the answer is right, then the stimulus is an example of the flaw in the answer choice. So if you can generate multiple examples of a flaw, that lets you recognize what is and what is not an example of the flaw, like the stimulus. And the words are very abstract and complex, so going through this process and drilling is the best way to get better at flaw. For strengthen questions, I try and actually I think of strengthen and weaken in the same way. I think there's usually a problem in the stimulus, something is wrong. I try and identify that flaw, and then strengthen will just point something out that fixes it. Okay, someone asks, what's my method of attacking assumption questions? First of all, do you mean necessary or sufficient assumption? Because they're very different. Some people lump them together because of the common name, but they have nothing in common. So I guess, first off, which type do you mean? Okay, someone asks, how many practice tests to take per day from now until test day? Or sorry, how many practice tests to take, not per day, from now until test day to help us improve but avoid burnout? About 1 a week is usually the optimal thing. You could probably bump it up a little bit if you're not stressed, but if you are stressed, then I wouldn't. So probably 2 or 3, and then you could just do time sections. The main point of a practice test is just to measure your progress and get you used to taking a practice test. You've probably mostly done that by now, so don't overdo it. It's easy to burn yourself out, and it's more important to drill. Someone says in LR, I'm always getting the first 10 to 13 questions correct, then I narrow it down to 2, pick the right one 50-50. Unfortunately, the first 10 to 13 questions are the easy ones. You can see this if you look at the LSAT Super Prep. They actually have difficulty rankings. So that just means you're getting the easy ones right and you're 50-50 on the harder ones. So there's not really any strategic advice to give about that, because that's just what you would expect, that you get the easier ones right more often than the harder ones. And assumption cues are messing me up. How do I break the habit? I guess same question, which assumption ones? Okay, someone says, question about LG. Big source of panic is when I feel like I'm spending too much time on one game, which makes me lose focus. No, I don't recommend skimming games. And I think the best way to not worry about the timing is to drill games over and over so that you get used to doing them. And then you want to cultivate a sense of am I doing this efficiently? Because if you're doing it efficiently, but it still takes you 10 minutes, then it just means it's a hard game. And there's no problem. Whereas if you feel lost and flummoxed and so on, then it doesn't matter even if it takes you 7 minutes. Well, actually that would still work. But the point is, you should usually feel good about how you're doing a game if you're doing it well. And then the time doesn't matter. You instead are seeing am I making deductions properly? If you can cultivate that sense, that's the best way I know to get over time panic. It's just to know that you're doing good things, and then you'll, on average, get there on time. Okay, so I'm now at the new questions. So someone says for like, okay, so there are questions about sufficient assumption questions. These ones actually, they're easy to improve on. I would go to my questions by type thing. You should be able to see it on the screen now. And I would drill some of them, and I would read the explanation for every one. You can also go to the LR Mastery Seminar, and this will cover it like more top down, where like I actually expand on the strategy and go through examples. But if you're not doing that and you just look at like sufficient assumption questions here, you should also be able to see, if you like, you read about 10 of my explanations, like, oh, this is the method that he's doing. Usually, you draw everything, but you split apart the conclusion and you fill in the evidence, and there'll be some gap in there, and you have to add a premise that fills that gap. They've been using this a bit less consistently because I think people started noticing the pattern and got too easy, but that's roughly it. So I don't want to spend like too much time on there, but look through my explanations and you'll start to see this pattern. I usually break it out in each one where it's applicable, or do the LR seminar. Either way, drill a bunch of sufficient assumptions, redo them. They're very mechanical. They're kind of like logic games, and you can get very good at them. There's not that many per test, like usually 2, but if you flip them from like being really hard, 2 really hard questions to 2 really easy questions, then that's still a big win. Okay, 2 questions about the reading section. One, like how to go faster. I mean, it's kind of hard because the way you go faster is just mostly based on your baseline reading speed, and simply like trying to go faster at reading isn't going to work because you have to actually understand what you read as well. But I would say, counterintuitively, go a bit slower and make sure you understand what you're reading and reread it if you're not sure. And as you go through, just kind of try and hold in mind a mental model of the passage, so that you know when you're on paragraph 3 how it relates to what they said in paragraph 1. Like, and here's maybe an analogy. I just came up with it. We'll see if this analogy works. But imagine that, you were accused of some crime, and you had to do something for your own defense. You're not in jail, you're on bail, whatever. And the lawyer comes and they tell you what you have to do. So, this is serious. You could go to jail. And they're giving you some instructions and they're talking. What you're going to want to do, if you're smart, is know all the things that they're saying and try and like condense it so you have all the things that you have to do and like roughly what they said. You either do this in your head or you do it on paper. But you want like both the whole picture of everything they say and also the specifics of when they talk about like what you should say to police, what you should say to judge, things you have to do, evidence you should gather, and you would have like either little notes or just condense it all mentally. But that's basically what I'm doing when I'm reading a passage, and what that does, even though it's like a bit slower up front, because you might be like, hold on, what did you say at that point? Repeat that, please, which is comparable to just rereading. It may be a little bit slower up front, but then you actually understand what you read. And so when a question asks about something, you're like, oh, well, I just know this. Compared to the more typical strategy of someone just like rushing through and like, no time, I gotta get to the last passage. And if you don't actually understand anything while doing that, then you're just going to take forever on the questions. So I would actually experiment with like going a little bit slower and focusing on understanding. Like, was it Matt? I forget. Someone who took the LR seminars, Mitchell. They said, like, I like how he focuses on understanding rather than trying to gimmick it. That's for LR, but the same thing applies to RC. I think if you understand an RC passage, like, nothing can stop you. But understanding it is the hard part. So I would just try a little bit, like focusing on understanding as your goal, rather than speed, rather than getting stuff right, rather than the questions even. I just mean understanding the passage, not doing the questions, just did I understand what I read? You can even do this as a drill. Print off a couple of copies, or make a photocopy or whatever. Give one to someone else. Have them read it for a while and take notes. Then you do a stopwatch, have them time you reading it, and you can reread stuff until you feel you've understood. Turn it over, see how long that took, and then have them quiz you on the passage without you looking at it. So you want to see like how well did you really internalize that? Because when you're doing the questions, you're by definition not looking at the passage, you're looking at the question. And what you want is your mind to just know some things in the background so that when you see a certain question, you like think about it. Just like, if someone says like, well, I want to drive from New York City to Honolulu, Hawaii. What do you think of my plan? Like, if you know anything about American geography, that's a bad plan because there's an ocean and you can't drive there. I mean, maybe there's a ferry, but supposing you were opposed to boats and you were going to drive, like you don't need to consult anything to know that information. You just have it there. And that's how you want to be when you are going through the answers on a reading comprehension question. Like, you don't have to look back at the passage. I mean, I do recommend looking back at the passage to check specific things sometimes, but in general, you also want to be able to form opinions without the passage in front of you. Because often when I ask people, like, what did the passage say? What did it mean? They go back and they just read literally what the passage said. What we want to be able to do is talk about it the way that I'm just talking about RC right now. Like, I have no notes. I'm just off the cuff. You can, to some extent, in like 3.5 minutes, get that level of knowledge about an RC passage. If you can do it faster, great. But even if it takes you 3.5 minutes, then that's enough time. And, maybe you still won't be able to do the 4 passages. Maybe it'll take you 5 minutes to do that level of comprehension. But if you get everything right and then you guess on the rest, that's still like a good strategy. So I would recommend focusing on understanding first. Any questions about that? Someone asked how many prep tests I took. I don't actually know. When I took the LSAT, it was back in the days when they didn't have real LSAT questions in most of the practice books. And I was just in my local Canadian bookstore, and I picked up a Kaplan book. And I also have like the book from the LSAT that I probably got from my university. So I did whatever the LSAT practice materials had. That might have been like 1 exam and a few practice questions. And then I did what was in the book, which was, probably a thick book like that, but they weren't real questions. They were ones made by Kaplan. So depending on how you want to define it, I did like 1, or I did maybe like 10 or 20, but they weren't real ones. I also, Logic Games was my worst, so I went back up and got a Logic Games book and just did the whole thing in the final week, and that actually worked. So I'm slightly contradicting myself where I was saying, like, you can't cram much in the final week. I did cram in the final week, but only because I had just like woefully underprepared Logic Games, and so cramming it actually worked. That's the one section where cramming can make a difference. If you have like 6 days and you get the right method and you cram Logic Games, you can like totally improve it. But like if I had done any proper study prior to that, then I wouldn't have been able to cram it in the last week because I would have got the low-hanging fruit. I got my low-hanging fruit in the final week. Okay, someone says, I burned through all of the RC sections from 52 to 80. In a couple months, I did some better to retake or take earlier ones. I'm actually a huge fan of retaking practice sections. And what you should do when you're retaking is try and like prove stuff right or wrong. You're not just trying to like remember the answer, but you're trying to say like why is this right? Why is the other stuff wrong? And if you're doing that, you can see deeper into the structure each time you repeat something. So I like repeating. It's still useful to do new stuff too, but I would definitely add some repetition in there. Oh, geez. Sorry, I've been looking at the chat, and I only now noticed that there's like actual Q&A thing. I'm going to go with the more recent ones, just because people probably have done them more recently. Someone says, would it be too overwhelming to purchase all 3 master seminars and complete them before the test in January? Let's see. 23 hours. I would say, I don't know about doing all of them, but I think you could very easily, like, get them all, and then say, like, maybe you watch all of Logic Games. Maybe you just watch, like, specific walkthroughs on reading comp, and you watch, like, 2 LR lessons on the question types you're most focusing on. And that might be, like, 8 hours. And that's very doable. And then if like something was like, oh, like Jesus, LR thing like really helped, then you can go further into it and see how much you want to do. I would not recommend just buying all three and sitting and watching them back to back 23 hours without doing practice stuff. I think it's a good idea to buy all three, but then just pick one, focus on that. Because I'm assuming in your studying, you're cycling between like drilling logic games and drilling LR a little bit. So, just use one when you're focusing on one thing and then switch to the other one. I think it'll be useful to have exposure to the advice from all three, but I wouldn't recommend just reading, watching everything just for the sake of it because you have it. That's the difference between like getting a course 3 months before the LSAT and studying 3 months before the LSAT and studying in the final 3 weeks. Like I said, you can't fix every single thing, and you may not watch every single video, but you nonetheless might get value out of having access to the 3 sections, because even if you just watch like 2 LR videos, that still might tip you over the edge on certain question types, and so it's worth doing. Hopefully that was helpful. Someone asked, do I ever give rec letters? I don't know that a recommendation letter from me would have any value whatsoever. But no, basically. No one's ever asked, actually. Partly because, nowadays I don't work one-on-one with that many students, and that would be pretty much the only situation I think where like I would be qualified to give any sort of recommendation. But also, like my whole expertise is about seeing how you do on the LSAT. But that comes up in your LSAT score, so the LSAT is sort of like doing what my recommendation would do anyway. Someone asked, does a super high LSAT help more with other unfavorable circumstances, or is 175 the same as 177? Again, I'll give a reference to medians. If you're over the median, it's good. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. So, I don't know what the medians are at, like, Harvard Law School say. Harvard's medians are 173, so probably wouldn't make a difference there. Let's see about Yale. Ugh. This is law school transparency, by the way, grade site. I don't know. That does get you over our 75th median. I don't know if those top schools care about that for cosmetic reasons. Well, so they had a follow up, like it's 5 points above the median, better than 3 points. That's the thing. Like I'm not sure that it matters. But it might if you're above the 75th. I would actually ask like an admissions consultant this. My intuition is no. It doesn't really make much of a difference. Because at 175, you're like already above the medians of every law school in the country. So it won't even have the effect. Like sometimes if you're like more middle of the pack and you're looking at one school and you get above a competing school's median, so you get into that one, then this school will be like, crap, we got to give them a scholarship so they don't go to that better school. That can make a difference outside of medians, but at the very top, I don't know. But I'm speaking outside of my expertise, so not sure. What do I think about Canadian schools medians, like University of Toronto, Osgoode, and Ontario schools? And I think they're just listed online somewhere, and then I know U of T's the highest, and Osgoode, and they're generally higher than the other Ontario ones, and they're all in the 160s. So it's a bit easier to get into than the States. But, like, I don't know, was there something more specific than that? I guess I'm just not sure what you want to know about their medians. So, a lot of Canadians today, actually. Good to see you guys. If anyone's in Montreal, let me know. I sometimes meet up with students who are studying. It's good to, like, see students in person. Someone asked, is there a law school equivalent for Canadian schools? And not as much. So in the States, it's a really rigid system where they've got this magazine that ranks everybody, and everyone is afraid of it. In Canada, like we don't even really have this like national ranking thing. Ontario is really the only school where a ranking matters. Otherwise, you just go to the province you want to work in. So, if you want to do law in Saskatchewan, then go to the university in Saskatchewan and don't go to Ontario. It doesn't matter what they're theoretically ranked at. You want to go to the one in the city where you learn the local law and meet the local lawyers and so on. So, but other than that, just the Ontario schools have different average scores, and you're still probably better off if you're higher average. And the Ontario schools actually might care if, about a 177 instead of a 170, even if their average is 165, but they might look and see like, well, that 177 is obviously higher, so we like that. The US schools are way more mechanical, but that's because like there's an LSAT median, there's a law school with a certain LSAT median for every LSAT score range, basically, all the way from like 140 all the way up to like 173. So no matter where you are, you get slotted into a school based on your score ranking. Whereas the Canadian ones are more compressed, so they can actually look and see like, well, this person's really high, so we like that, versus another person's like, they're sort of high, we like that a bit less. They can actually, think about it the way a normal person would, saying like, well, the higher score is better than the less high score. Whereas the US schools are just sort of in a straight jacket of like, well, they're both above our median, so we like them both. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if you're applying to a school with a median of 150 and you have a 175, I'm sure they look at that better than a 152. They must in some way account for that. But I think the biggest thing is whether you're over the median or not. Someone asked, does age play a factor in Canadian admissions, 30 plus? I don't think so. I was at U of T and there were like, mostly people were younger than 30, but there were plenty of people that were older than 32, so I don't think it matters too much. The one thing is they do have what's called a mature applicant category, because they recognize that like you've done a bunch of things since university, and so like when you're evaluating a 23-year-old, pretty much all you've got is university grades and LSAT score. The Canadian schools may consider stuff like work experience and so on. I don't know that American schools have this category. Like I said, medians. And by the way, master's degrees don't matter at all either place. Like master's GPA is generally easier than undergrad GPA, and so it's not very relevant. But you'd want to see how the mature category thing works at the Canadian school. Is 40 a big problem? Probably not. Ask the school. But I don't think, as long as they think you're a good fit academically for the school and will be good for the school environment, then I think they're like glad to have you. So I don't think it matters. You're paying tuition, you're enhancing the university environment, you're still young enough to have a legal career, so why would they care? And you might have like some work experience that can provide insight, whatever. But ask the school, see what their mature thing is like. Okay, someone asked, what's the best range of prep tests to use for LR practice? More recent is always better, but you want to save recent ones for full-time ones as well. So I would just like pick some recent tests and decide to use those for sections, and then use other recent tests for full-time tests. You can also redo recent LR sections from like a test. If you say you did test 79 as a full-time test, you could then redo the LR sections later to get more depth into them. Okay, someone asked about information regarding tiers between schools. In the US they have the T14. Those generally place very well. Below that, you generally want to look at the region you want to work in and then pick the best school in that region, or a good school in that region. So, there'll be like school rankings, like I don't know, some school in Ohio might be 151 and some school in Kentucky might be 143, but you'd be a fool to go to the Kentucky school instead of the Ohio school. Well, actually, wait, how close are I should pick like examples where I know the states are obviously not close. So if you've got a school in Oregon that's 151 and a school in Florida that's 143, and you want to work in Oregon, then go to the best ranked Oregon school you can get into. Don't go to Florida, even though the rank is like a little bit higher. Whereas in the States, the T14 one's placed nationally, so you could consider going there, even compared to a regional school, because they place well. Um, in Canada, McGill and U of T are the ones that place nationally. Otherwise, you just place regionally. And like I said, if you want to go somewhere that's not Ontario or Quebec, you probably still should just go to a school in the province you want to work in. Do I think people over-exaggerate the difference between older PTs and the newer ones? I think they did get harder. I find when I write explanations for the new ones, I need more words. Because like I've written older tests recently, and I've written new tests recently. And the older ones, I seem to be able to explain more succinctly. So I think people are preparing more. And so I think the scoring scale has gotten harder in the last few years, making harder prep tests. Other than that, like, it's not a giant difference between like the underlying logic, and I do think it's overemphasized a bit. Like if you just had LSAT's 29 to 39, that's all you had to practice with, you could still get a great LSAT score. But it's obviously better to use the new material as well. Someone asked about, do I have any tips on the logical reasoning section? This was a while ago, so they may be gone, but basically repeating things is the #1 tip I can give. And again, focusing on proving things right and on refining your diagramming style. That's the thing that'll make the biggest difference. Okay, I'm just checking things because I'm going to wrap it up pretty soon. But if anyone has any more questions, let me know. I'm just looking through these old questions here to see if there's any worth doing. Okay, that's all the old Q&A. Anyone have any more questions or any other questions about the seminars? Also, those of you who like sort of posted mini reviews in the comments, are you willing to leave those reviews on the site? Oh, thanks. The one thing I would say is, if you're able, do it before the LSAT, because in my experience, even though right now you're like very excited about LSAT videos and like feel sure that you will leave a review, after you take the LSAT, you may just forget everything about the LSAT for 3 weeks after that and not do it because you're just like, oh, thank God I'm done with that. So it would be great. Yeah, that is a good point, to give a full review when you're able. Just basically psychologically, you're very unlikely to do it after the LSAT, but if you do it before the LSAT, then after you've had a chance to fully watch them, then like perfect. Good stuff. Okay, well, thanks for that. Anything else before we call it a day? So, and I'll be emailing out this recording. It sometimes takes a little bit to process the video, so it may not come out for a day or two, but I should be able to get to it pretty soon. I would also say, as for like testing the waters, let's say you want like a 165 and you do a full-time test now and you're at like 152. Then I probably wouldn't take it in January, just because there's like basically no chance at all of achieving your goal. A low score doesn't really hurt you. They look at the highest score generally. Even in Canada, I believe like pretty much every school does that. But it's still not a great idea to take it like if there is guaranteed failure. If there's like some chance of a high score, because say you need a 165 and your average is 162, but sometimes you just like get lucky and you get a high outlier, then like go ahead and take it. I would just give that advice, like assess where your score range is compared to your goal, and if it's realistic to have even on like a everything goes right test day, you beat above your range. Wow. Are you scoring like at that level? Yeah, and that sounds fine to take it for January then, as long as you're like getting it on time stuff, then it means that there's a plausible chance that you'll get that score, so it's a good idea to take both. Because the thing is too, like a lot of people just have through like dumb luck a bad test day. So if you're averaging 176, you might one day get like a 174 and one day you get a 178, and then it doesn't mean that like you did anything wrong the first time or right the second time. It's just, I don't know, maybe the question was like a little bit harder for you, and so having two takes like that can be very helpful because it smoothed out some of the randomness involved in taking the thing. All right. Well, I would say good luck, everyone. Thanks for coming today. I hope you've enjoyed the webinar, and I'll send the recording out. You've got the discount code LSAT Hacks 35, and I wish you luck. And that's all. Happy New Year.